Hello and welcome to the Great Revel. First and foremost, I want to thank all my patron Malek. They're basically responsible for this episode being recorded. I wasn't really planning on doing this, but they subbed. They demanded it, and I was like, yeah, sure, I got time this weekend to actually record this, so why the fuck not? There's actually some stuff that deserves to be talked about in the burn world. So it kind of all works out. Okay, so I'm gonna start by doing a small, something very fast, but a small Innistrad Midnight Hunt mini set review. I just want to talk about some cards that I think are very interesting coming from this set into Modern. Here's the thing. I'm not gonna be showing images or anything. This is all audio, but if you don't know anything about the set, it's fine. I'll loosely describe the cards. I'll read everything they do, and it's just something to have in mind when you do look up at the set, or if you have. These are the cards that I think that are interesting. So first of all, we have Cathar. That's how you read that, right? Cathar Commando, which costs a 1 and a white. It's a creature, a human soldier, which is a very relevant tribe, especially human. It has flash, that's the big thing about it. And you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. I think this card's very good. Being a human, having flash is very impressive. The stats are very aggressive, which means that it's actually a decent card to flash in and beat down your opponents if they don't have anything that you really want to destroy, which sometimes does occur. By the way, I'm talking about these cards in general, not specifically for burn. However, this one, if you're a burn, it's a common. If you're a burn player, get a set of these and keep them in your wherever you store your cards, because maybe, who knows, if everything you want to destroy is also vulnerable to a 3/1 that gets to attack, this card's very good. If this even attacks 1, it's already very good. If you get to have it pressure your opponent a bunch, and I don't know, just off the top of my head, you get this down, it's pressuring your opponent, and they can't really cast a Batter Skull to stabilize, because you'll just sack this and kill it. So this is a very cool card. Next, we have Curse of Silence, a very weird one. It costs a white, it's an enchantment or a curse. So you enchant a player, as it enters the battlefield, you choose a card name. Spells with a chosen name cost 2 more to cast. And here's the good part about it. Whenever an enchanted player casts a spell with a chosen name, you can sacrifice this aura and draw a card, which is really damn useful. It's like a meddling mage kinda that replaces itself once your opponent is casting that card. It's very interesting. I'm not sure if it makes the cut anywhere, because being attacks and not being a straight up denial means it might not be super amazing at its floor. Its ceiling is obviously you play it against a combo or a combo-ish deck, and you deny them of their winning play, at least for 2 turns, which in Modern is a lot. And costing a single white's very good, but I'm not really sure if it will ever do anything that big. Combo isn't particularly good in Modern right now. Between Force of Negation and stuff like that, this type of hate isn't really amazing either. The only combo deck that I can think of off the top of my head is Living Hand, and Living Hand kind of dungs on this. You can petty theft it and still go for your thing on curve, or you can force it. You have a good number of responses to this, and I can't see you playing this over Chalice of the Void, for example, if you're targeting Living End. So yeah, but it's still a very interesting card. So I thought I'd mention it. Next, we have Faithful Absence, which costs a 1 and a white. It's an instant, and it reads, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller investigates. It's kind of insane that this effect is still not just... I don't know. I'd assume that there would be like a white card of mana value 2 that would get to destroy creatures or exile creatures without a downside. That's still not a thing. However, this is an instant, which is very good for control-your decks. It hits planeswalkers, which is really damn good. And it's very splashable even. I can't think of a deck that would want to splash this effect, because this effect's really... Well, I guess green doesn't really have this. Yeah, but red and black have these effects, so I don't know if this is something you'd splash for, but I think this card is going to be a real game changer for Control, because up till now, Control was stuck with not ideal answers. Path to Exile obviously has the downside of giving your opponent a land and you're a control deck, so that's actually relevant. Prismatic Ending is a sorcery, which is a big downside, I've got to say. Like I feel like I've won a ton of games against Control because their answers are suddenly sorceries, and they just out tempo themselves, so that's kind of awkward. This one, it gives your opponent a clue. The upside of this against the I don't know what's it. There was one card in also in an Innistrad set that did this. Well, it exiled and your opponent created clues, and it would get cards with the same name, but it was a sorcery. I think that's enough of a downside. That this is much better. So yeah, this one might be very relevant. And I think this is the last white card, yes. Sunset Revelry for 1 and a white. It's a sorcery. If an opponent has more life than you gain 4 life. If an opponent controls more creatures than you, create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens. If an opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw a card. So this is basically 2/3 of a Timely Reinforcements, which personally I think is worse than the Timely Reinforcements, because on your turn 2, it's very unlikely that you'll have that the situation will be so out of hand that you'd ever want this over Timely. I think that the clause of drawing cards will essentially never happen. I'd like a word with any Control player that has less cards than the aggressive deck they're playing against. I just don't see that being a thing. Even with Force of Negation to kind of make this a little better. I don't think this is the type of card that you'd ever slot above Timely Reinforcement, which is already hilariously bad. Like, Timely Reinforcements is so bad that I can't even imagine why you would keep playing it in a meta that isn't like 50% burn. And even then, like, it's a sorcery, right? So burn players have some outs to it, and they can grind through it if you're keeping a mediocre hand for a Timely Reinforcements. And in my opinion, this is worse. But people have been talking about it, so I felt right to include it here. Even if it's just to say that I don't think this card should see play. I think it will see play because people read draw a card, it's white, people immediately get huge erections for it, but I don't think it's good. Moving on to blue. The first one is, I think, one of the best cards in the set. Consider. The card's called Consider, which might make up some weird conversations and confusing conversations later on. But it costs a single blue. It's an instant, and it basically reads Surveil 1, draw a card. So it's a slightly better opt. I say slightly better because putting a card in a graveyard's infinitely more valuable than scrying one, right? If you're choosing to keep it on top, it's the same as opt. If you're choosing to bin it, it's better because if you're putting a card in the graveyard, you have more ways to interact with it. in most decks you have more ways to interact with the graveyard cards. Like I can't even imagine a deck where you'd play this and not have a way to interact with cards in the graveyard. Like just off the top of my head, with control you have Snapcaster Mage, so if you maybe you're surveilling a card away that you don't need right now, and you have a Snapcaster in hand in case you want to use it later. In something, even in something like Prowess, where they have played Opt, this is just better because if you bin a Lava Dart, you're immediately in a better position. And now with Darcy, you can also bin like a creature. So this basically surveils 2, so it doesn't surveil 2, it surveils 1 twice, it's different, but same difference. You can bin things to enable Delirium, which is kind of cool. So yeah, I think this is a straight upgrade to Opt, at least for the format. Like, not sure if it's a straight upgrade in other formats. Like, I don't know, the other place that would play Opt is like Pioneer. I don't know if this is an upgrade for Pioneer. Not sure. Because they do have Fabled Passage to shuffle the deck, and they kind of don't have ways to interact with the graveyard, so it would make sense that the Scry is actually more valuable than the Surveil. But I think this card is going to... Basically, if you're playing Opts, you're going to start playing Consider. Thank God it's a common. Even if it were an uncommon, these non-rotating format playable cards can get annoyingly expensive if they're uncommon. After that, we have Fading Hope. It costs a single blue. It's an instant again, and you return target creature to its owner's hand, so you can use it on yours. So similar to, oh god, what's it called? The one that pings its controller. I can't remember the name right now. God, what's it called? I don't know. I'm not gonna look it up right now, but it's the bounce that Prowess sometimes plays, and it pings the opponent because it used to be very useful with Light Up the Stage. Nowadays, that's not really relevant, and so you bounce a creature. If its mana value was 3 or less, you scry one, and that's pretty huge. So this is not only a tempo play because you're delaying your opponent from enacting their game plan. But you're also scrying 1, which is very good. Like, whenever you get these little nuggets of value for potentially aggro strategies or control strategies or anything, right? This is just a bounce. This is just an unsummon with an upside. Which it's not the best effect around, sure, but it's still really cool to have in the decks that would care about this type of effect. Next, we have Memory Deluge. Is that how you pronounce that? Doesn't matter. Costs 2, a blue and a blue, so mana value 4. It's an instant, and it reads, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. The kicker here is that it has a flashback for 5 and 2 blues, so it costs 7 to flashback. So that's why it says look at the top X cards, because you can just you cast it for 4, you look at 4 and you choose 2. That's pretty good already. That's probably the best 4 mana card advantage spell out there, I think. It's an instant, so that's kind of insane. And the flashback is a hard cast dig through time, which is not amazing. The card was broken because it had Delve, which meant you cast it for like 3, maybe 4. I don't know. I never cast one in my life. But having Delve was why it was pretty broken. However, just casually having a dig through time in your graveyard for whenever. This is an instance, so it's like, oh, I have mana here, my opponent isn't doing anything. Let me just make sure I don't lose this game. That's essentially what this card says. I think this, if you're ever playing a 4 mana card advantage spell in your control decks, this is it. I think Fact or Fiction is worse because your opponent is choosing, and Sure, you could argue that my opponents are not good at the game, usually, so Fact or Fiction is usually better because it looks at one extra card, and they usually don't pile it correctly, and I get better cards, but like, in a vacuum, your opponents are playing perfectly, that's how you should always evaluate cards, even though that's not really a reality. Um, but looking at the top four and choosing the best two, in my opinion, is better than looking at the top five and choosing the best and the worst, because that's typically how it goes, right? You're usually choosing the best and the worst, or like the best, the worst, and the land. Sure, getting a land is nice in control, but uh, I think that this is typically better than Fact or Fiction, which is, I think it's the best 4-mana draw spell that Control would be playing. Um, and I'm not even touching in the fact that it has flashback for a hardcast dig through time, which is just kind of insane to casually have in your graveyard. Next, we have Otherworldly Gaze. Costs a single blue, and this card has generated some discussion. My first reaction was, wow, this is absolutely insane. My second reaction, after people were saying, no, it's actually completely unplayable, was, yeah, maybe it's not amazing. But honestly, I think, so it's an instant, and it basically reads Surveil 3. It has a lot of text because Surveil isn't a keyword for some reason, but it reads Surveil 3, and that's it. You don't even draw a card. But this, I think this is deceptively good. I wouldn't call it broken. I'm not going to push that narrative here that this card is very good, this card will see play, but I do think it's very interesting. The upside of this over something like I don't know, other effects that mill you a bunch. This essentially mills you 3, but you get a look at the cards and choose some of them. I think that's insanely powerful, because you're milling yourself for 3. Oh, it has flashback too. So for 1 in the blue, you get to flash it back. That's really good. That's what pushes it, by the way, so I think that's relevant to say. But I think that getting to choose what you're milling and what you're not milling is very strong. Because suddenly keeping one-liners in Dredge might not be awful, even though I'm not sure if this card would play Dredge over a Shriekhorn. But I do think that getting to choose what you're milling is incredibly relevant. This isn't Eternal Format's Dredge, where you don't play any lands and you kind of do want to mill everything over. In Modern, self-mill decks, self-turbo mill decks will often still want to draw some cards that are relevant. And I think that this card fills that previously unexisting card that you'd get to choose. You'd get to make the choice between what you're milling and what you're not milling. I think that's very relevant. And again, not saying this card is going to be insane, not even saying this card is going to be played, but I do think it's interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does end up getting played. Okay, now going over to black, we have, I would honestly call this the best card in the set for Modern. I haven't seen, for some reason, I haven't seen many people talking about it, but in my opinion, it is the best card of the set. It's called Infernal Grasp. It costs a 1 and a black. It's an instant. It reads destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. So this is the Doomblade to end all Doomblades. Like, right? The only way to make it better is you take away the you lose 2 life clause. So that way it's just a perfect spell. But this is an instant. It makes it so you can kill anything in black for 2 mana. I don't think that this spell existed. Like, Doomblades have always had some weird clause. The closest we had gotten here was in Ixalan, but it cost a black and a black, which is much harder to cast in the decks that would want this effect. So now there you have it. There's a proper Doomblade that kills everything. Sure, losing to life isn't great. You could even look at this and say, why would I ever play this over what's it called? Dismember, because this is basically Dismember, except you can cast Dismember for 1 if you're really tight on mana or whatever. Not quite. We have had some cards that don't die to Dismember. Primeval Titan is one of them. Murktide Regent is a new one that doesn't die to it. And it's not that hard for prowess creatures to get out of range, with spells like Mutagenic Growth being in the format. So I do think that this is very relevant. I think that if you're playing black, you're suddenly playing like 2 or 3 of these, and you're basically never losing games against those big creatures. So yeah, I specifically think that this card might push Sultai to being really good, because you don't have to play arguably bad removal spells like Assassin's Trophy and the other one that's uncounterable. What's it called? Abrupt Decay. Yeah, those spells are amazing, but they're limited. Like if people stop playing Path because it gives a tapped land to your opponent, they don't really want to play Assassin's Trophy in big numbers, right? Because you do give an untapped land to your opponent, which is worse. Sure, it hits every permanent, so that's why you'd play like 1, maybe 2 in the whole 75. Abrupt Decay, similar. It does have a bunch of hits. Sadly, it does miss some key targets, some of which are very relevant right now in Modern, like Murktide Regent. And this covers everything. So I do think that this card might push that 3-color deck a bit further, because now I just have access to a proper removal spell. Now coming on to red, I have to say, before talking about red cards, because this is a burn thing. I've been talking about non-burn stuff for 20 minutes, but this is still very much a burn podcast. We'll get there. Now coming over to red cards, I will have to say there are no upgrades to red decks. Not gonna put it like that. There are no updates to burn with this set. Period. But I will mention 2 red cards. One which is, not a burn card, but a very interesting red card, and one which is also not a burn card. Don't even think about it, but it's a playable card for red aggressive shells. So first of all, we have Cathartic Pyre, costs 1 and red, it's an instant, and you get to choose one. Either deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, sadly it doesn't go face, or you get to you get to rummage 2, so you discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards. It sucks that this doesn't work like Seasoned Pyromancer, where the amount you draw isn't connected to the amount you discard. However, it does work like that, meaning I don't think this card will be that good. It still digs you quite deep. For like a combo deck that might want some removal, like this is very good for that, right? Like, I don't know, off the top of my head, I can see this playing Storm, where, looting, trying to get that special card you want is relevant, but also removing things, maybe even game 1, where you don't really have access to removal spells. Now suddenly you do have removal, plus you have a way to ditch those extra lands that you don't really need, and dig for action. It's also a storm count spell, right? So that's relevant, and it puts things in your graveyard which you use, so that's also cool. I don't know, it just seems very synergistic with that type of strategy. But these effects are really decent, so who knows, maybe some deck does pick it up. Now we have Play with Fire. Costs a single red, it's an instant, it's a shock. But if you point it at a player, it does say a player, not opponent, so you can do it to yourself if you're playing against Leyline of Sanctity, so that's cool. But if it hits a player, you scry 1. Again, not a burn card. Do not put this in your burn decks. But it's immediately a top contender for the shock slot. Some decks have historically played shock. You've had Firebolt making waves in Obosh because the flashback meant that later in the game you could, push through 4 damage. Tarfire and Seal of Fire have both made impacts because they're, additional permanent types for stuff like Tarmogoyf and Darcy. And also, Seal of Fire has that special property where you invest the mana right away, but you don't have to point it till later on. I think that if you're I can't imagine any decks that don't care about Delirium playing anything other than this if they do want to shock. Which right now shock's very valuable. It kills monkeys, it kills Darcy's, it kills not much else, but still, shock is valuable, and pointing it the issue I have with this is that it only scries if you point it at face, and the one deck that you want to point it at face is Burn, which you have so many better options that you wouldn't really play this. Still, interesting spell. I think it's way better for Pioneer, but here we are talking about Modern. I'll try to be fast now because I'm dragging this for too long. I didn't want this to be so long, but whatever. Next we have Faithful Mending, costs a white and a blue. It's an instant and it's Faithless Looting, except you also gain 2 life, and it has the same flashback cost, which is 3. So for 1 white and a blue, you get flashed back. I don't think this is it. Costing white means it's not really that playable, and I don't think that this card is going to be the thing that brings back looting decks, because having looting decks didn't really want to play these 2 colors together, I think. It being an instance, very cool. Obviously an upgrade over Faithless Looting. And also, gaining life for some reason is here. But I doubt that this card is it. However, I know people are exciting. Any card that brings back memories from before times, people get super into. So I know people will be playing this. If it ends up being good, we'll see. And finally, this is the last card that I will be talking about for this mini, not so mini Innistrad Midnight Hunt set review, is Rite of Harmony. It costs a green and a white. It's an instant, and it reads, whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. And it has flashback for 2, a green and a white. As I think there are other similar effects to this. I know that there's one that costs a green and a blue, and that didn't push elves into being a proper deck. However, there's an argument that white is better for elves because you get removal, which is something that I think that elves doesn't have access to. I mean, they do because they play black. Why they don't really play much is a bigger question. However, I don't think this is gonna push elves. I do think that this also counting enchantments is interesting, because suddenly if you're playing an enchantress deck, you have an additional enchantress that your opponent can't interact with, or rather has a very hard time interacting with because counter spells are a thing. So maybe it finds a couple of copies in that deck, but time will tell. So that's it. Those were the cards that I thought were interesting when looking at Innistrad. I think Innistrad is a very cool set. I think the setting is very cool. I think it's giving us tons of tools to make Standard fun again. After 2 years of not playing Standard, I'm excited for it again, so that should say something because I'm a degenerate that only likes to play burn decks. And I think that the power level of the set is good. Like, there are some things that might creep into older formats, but it's decidedly a format for Standard first. It then creeps into Pioneer, even less creeps into Modern, and some weird card might creep into Legacy or Vintage. I don't know. I don't think so with this set, but who knows? So yeah, that's all I had to say about Innistrad. I'm quite excited for it. Now let's talk proper burn. Let's talk proper burn now. And one of the reasons that pushed me to actually make this podcast episode was that some players, who I will not name, have been putting not bad cards that are actually better than cards that Burn plays, but they just don't go well with the whole Burn strategy. So just a quick reminder. I think I did talk about this in the first podcast episode, but that was a while ago. I've been on an extended pause for a while. But with Burn, you don't really care about specific cards doing good things. You want all your cards to point towards a single direction, which is killing your opponent. So you want bolts. So that's what you play. Every card you play in your deck should impact your opponent's life total. Sure, Eidolon and the other creatures may not impact your opponent's life total. Sure, Searing Blaze does have some awkward spots. And sure, Lightning Helix may just be a pretty lightning strike. But your whole plan is with every card you play, your opponent's life total gets smaller and smaller, or more threatened, until you do win the game. And so people have been putting 3 specific cards in Burn, which I do not agree with. Actually, just very quickly, I've seen Light Up the Stage in Burn decks. Just don't, okay? Just stop. Stop. It's a bad card for Burn. I know that I will end up writing a piece on why Light Up the Stage is bad, but just don't, okay? Okay, so first card that people have been putting, and okay, I understand why you would try. I was tempted to try it myself. I didn't do it because of monetary issues, but it's Ragavan. The card that people have been hyping up since Modern Horizons 2 came out. I think the card is very good. I by no means think that the card is... heck, I don't even think it's the best red 1-drop that exists. That goes to Darcy. However, the card is very good, and I can see why you would want to try it out. Sadly, I don't think it's the correct card for Burn, because... So, first of all, doesn't have haste, means... And that's by the way, that's good design, right? If this card naturally had haste, it has no haste, meaning it doesn't impact your opponent's life total right away. So that's already sketchy. You can tell me, oh yeah, but Eidolon doesn't either under a lot of circumstances. So what's that about? Okay, but Eidolon does impact your opponent's life total in this format more often than not. And you can set up Eidolon in ways that your opponent just doesn't have a winning line, right? If they do, they die. If they don't, they die. There's an expression for that that's much more eloquent that I don't remember right now. Damned if they do, damned if they don't. Is that it? I think it is. Well, with Ragavan, that's not really the story. The card not having haste is relevant. It's also having 1 toughness is so much worse than having 2 toughness. Because first of all, Lava Dart and Ren and 6 exist. Those cards are pretty bad against Burn typically. Especially Ren and 6. Like, people love shoving that Walker in any deck that plays those colors, which I think is wrong, but more on that on another day. But Burn's pretty good against Ren and 6. If your opponent's plan is turn 1 tap land into turn 2 Ren and 6, they're basically not... You're basically playing alone, right? At that point, they haven't interacted with you at all. Ren and 6 does a jack against your game plan, so you're living the good life. If suddenly Ren and 6 has a good target to ping, that's not the case. And who says Ren and 6 says any reasonable blocker? Like, I don't want to have to waste damage on like a mana dork. Well, I do, Bolt a Bird, but I don't want to be wasting spells against things that I don't really care about. Like, I don't know, a turn 2 or a turn 3 mana dork I will never really care about. And those favorably blocking Ragavan is an issue. But I think that those things, especially the being fragile, those things are nitpicking, right? Because sure, the card not having haste is bad, but maybe if the upside is that good, it would be worth it. Except not really. Burn is an aggro deck. The cards it plays are very similar. That's the whole thing about the deck. You only really want to waste mana to deal damage, meaning that you are very, very, very rarely going to be stealing cards from your opponents that you do want to play. So that upside basically doesn't exist for burn. Like, you're never really stealing something that you want to play. Oh, but if you steal a creature, maybe you want to cast it to put some more pressure. Well, not really. You wouldn't download a Tarmogoyf, right? You don't want to cast a Tarmogoyf in a lot of games. It's never going to be that big off of you alone, and it can be slow as heck. It opens you up to a ton of strategies. It can mean you get out tempoed. Like, burn is such a high tempo deck because all your things cost so little, and you're putting yourself in a position that you're getting out tempoed. I don't know. I don't think that you're realistically and by the way, Tarmogoyf is one of the best things you could steal as burn. And even then, I can see a ton of scenarios where I wouldn't want to cast it. So yeah. In the end, I don't think Ragavan is a card you should be playing in burn. Oh, but, testing is fun, it's interesting. Sure. You can try to put... let me get a really gross thing that people will never get mad over. You could try putting... people are gonna get mad over this. You could try putting warm milk in your cereal. It's interesting, but you're just gonna get a soggy mess that nobody likes. And that's a fact. So yeah, it's interesting to try. I don't think it's it for burn. Because whenever trying these things, you need to think, how does it improve bad matchups? Because and not how does it make good matchups even better? Because your good matchups, especially as burn, they're taken care of. You will win him a lot of times just because of how your deck lines up against them. Your bad matchups are what you need to think about. And I cannot think of Ragavan being good against any of Burn's bad matchups. Next one, a little less decisive, I think, which is Darcy, Dragon's Rage Channeler, for those that don't know the nickname. It's honestly a card that I liked when testing in Burn. I think the filtering is really amazing. Even putting one land in the graveyard is enough to make me feel things, and I don't often feel things. I think it's a card that I would very much like to experiment with more. But the current meta is so removal heavy that it doesn't. The card doesn't have haste, meaning that you're not directly impacting your opponent's life total. So I think that I would like to test it more in a meta without so much removal. However, it does have a little upset, because the issue about this card is that it's not a 1-drop, right? For burn, it's not a 1-drop. It's not a card you're playing on turn 1 to get, a single pinging attack on turn 1. No, it's something that you play after your other creatures, after you've curved them out. It's something you play as a follow-up aggression. It shares that with Eidolon, right? And so I think that's a thing that people still haven't gotten, that Darcy in Burn isn't an aggressive card, it's a follow-up card. Because if you're casting it and casting a spell, you're immediately getting value, so that's good. So even if it dies right away and you surveil the land to the graveyard, you kind of got your mana's worth. kinda, not really, but almost. So I think that does make the card interesting. As for Delirium, I think Delirium's pretty easy to achieve with the deck. Again, you play it as a follow-up card, meaning you will at least hope, and of course, oh, but what if you don't have any other creature? Well, yeah, games aren't always perfect, and you sometimes need to improvise. However, the idea of playing this card is that you play it not on turn 1, but like on turn 2 or turn 3 to follow up your aggressions. Like, you play Goblin Guy, they kill it still hits in for 2 or maybe 4. You play an Eidolon, they also kill it. Now you suddenly play Darcy and 2 bolts, and like it's already a 3/3 because you have creature enchantment. You most likely have land and instant or sorcery. So the Delirium part's really not hard to achieve, even without the enchantment. If you want to play it as a follow-up card to your early aggression, it means that you will most likely have a creature there already. And if you don't, people often say, oh, but what if you don't have a creature? Well, if I don't have a creature in the graveyard, it's likely that I have one on the board, meaning it's hitting my opponent, meaning I don't really care about my... So instead of having a Darcy as a 3/3, I have a Goblin Guide as a 2/2 and the Darcy as a 1/1. That's the same power attacking every turn, so I don't really care. But yeah, I think that if you use it as a follow-up creature, you can get immediate value from it. It does diverge from the type of value we want, which is damage. However, I do think it's an interesting card to test out. Again, in a world where every deck isn't playing Ragavan answers, in a world where every deck isn't playing tons of removal to grind you out of the game or to beat Lurrus decks. Notably, I don't think that you need Bauble, and I will talk about Bauble in a minute, but I don't think that you need Bauble for Darcy. I think casting Darcy into Bauble and surveilling one on turn 1 is very cute, yeah, but not worth the hassle. Because Bauble is bad in burn. It's just bad, because your deck isn't really lacking the critical mass. You have enough spells that do what you want to include them. Especially now with Flame Rift, you have more than enough spells to be including in your deck. So it's not like you could say, oh, but it's like you're playing less cards. You don't really need that. The card has enough downsides. Bauble in the Burn has enough downsides. The deck has too many sorcery speed threats that Bauble just messes with. And keeping an opener with Bauble, like, one of the most important skills with Burn is keeping hands, right? And if you add Bauble into the mix, you're essentially keeping a card that you don't know what it is. So it just doesn't go well with the whole strategy of Burn. And the upside, what would be the upsides? Oh, your Darcy is slightly better. Barely noticeably better, in my opinion. Again, we're talking about Burn. I think that Bauble and Darcy are insanely strong for mid-range decks. Burn, not so much. So you get a marginal upside there, even marginaler, however you would say that word, even more marginal, I guess. Is the upside of getting Bauble back with Lurrus. Like, the amount of games that you would play a Lurrus is so minimal that including said Lurrus is already questionable. So shaping your main deck to play well with that, just it doesn't even seem wrong. It is wrong. It's just wrong. So yeah. Those are my opinions on Ragavan, Darcy, and Bauble. I think that Ragavan and Bauble are no-goes. At least for now. I will say that. At least for now. Maybe the format changes enough that those cards would be something you'd want. But for now and for the foreseeable future, meaning unless something really drastic happens, like, I don't know, if they print a card that says, God, I don't even know. If they print a card that says, if you have an artifact in your graveyard, this bolt deals 9 damage. Well, yeah, 4 baubles in, maybe even 4 pirate spell bombs. I don't know. I don't even know, but it needs to be something of that caliber for me to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna play Mishra's Bauble. And Ragavan, I don't know. The meta would need to be something like every deck is playing Lava Spike for no good reason. Like they're not clocking you, they're just playing Lava Spike, and you're like, oh yeah, stealing a Lava Spike's actually nice. So yeah, that's it for those wonky burn builds that I've seen floating around, and it's fine if people want to try it out. It's honestly fine. It's not like I'm gonna say that they shouldn't try it out. I just think that they shouldn't say it's better, because it's verifiably not. Oh, but that dude did trophy with the deck. Well, yeah, good players are good. You know, playing a bad deck doesn't make them bad players all of a sudden. So you shouldn't really look at it. You shouldn't really look at these things. You really shouldn't look at Modern so results oriented. If a deck's winning, well, yeah, but look at the pilot. Put some weight on the person that's playing the deck. And speaking of that, Burn has been making some waves. The deck has suddenly become, in some eyes, good again. That's wrong. The deck was always good. I think that the last time that I thought, Burn is not well positioned was when went from Oko being legal to Once Upon a Time being legal, and in those two metas, Burn wasn't amazing. In the Oko meta, obviously, you know, if your opponent resolves the Oko and you don't kill him in the following turn, you essentially lose. They can just uptick Oko to gain enough life that they don't care. You can overcome, like, I don't know, 6 life from Oko, but not more than that. And even that's already, you need a really, really sick hand to get there. As for Once Upon a Time, the two most played decks back then that absolutely abused Once Upon a Time beyond belief were Amulet Titan, that matchup. We didn't even have Proctor back then, and Eldrazi another terrible matchup. And we didn't even have Incinerator back then either. So like, in that would have been the meta where I would just play Incinerator all day, because Incinerator makes those bad matchups into not so bad. I think they're still unfavorable, but resolving an Incinerator on turn 2 basically beats both those decks, unless they were teched against it, which maybe they would have been back then. I'm not sure. So yeah, I think that ever since then, Burn has been well positioned. And yes, I am including the Uro meta. I had an insane win rate against Uro because of 2 reasons. First and foremost, I think this was the most important thing. A 3-drop that gains 3 life isn't good. It's just not good. You can beat that almost any game. And it helped that card is blue-green, which is terrible at dealing with Burn. So they'd have to, you know, either be shocking themselves or playing. And those decks were playing like 4 colors, so like their mana bases were complete trash. So that matchup was, honestly, I think it was good. The control against the Uro control deck, I would call the matchup good. I lost very few matches against Uro, and I had something that I did want to mention. Surgical Extraction was the best Uro answer. Your opponent basically forgot about playing actual anti-red cards in their sideboard, so you know, you surgical their Uro, and oops, they don't have ways to actually beat you. More so because of the first reason. I don't think that your opponent casting an Uro was a problem. I do think that escaping it was a problem, but even then, it's something that you could overcome. So yeah, I never thought that Uru was really a problem for us. So I think that we've been well positioned since then. However, things did change. With Modern Horizons 2, people stopped playing Prowess. Not for any special reason. The deck just didn't get a big upgrade, so people just dropped it. If you speak with any Prowess aficionado, they'll say, yeah, the deck's really good. But alas, people that publicly play the game on Twitch and whatnot, they're not picking up the deck because it's not new. So nothing new there. But Prowess basically disappeared from the meta. That's weirdly good for us. The hate that Prowess requires is removal, but for some reason people kept trying to play life gain against them. Like you'd see people play like 3 timely reinforcements in their whole deck. And when you ask them, they would say, "Oh, it's good against Prowess and against Burn." And you're like, "Okay, but Burn isn't really popular, so why would you take it? Doesn't matter. They would play timely reinforcements because it's good against Burn, and it's not horrible against Prowess." That's what players actually say. "Oh, it's really good against Burn, and it's useful against Prowess." And then you'd say, "Wait, but Prowess is like 10% of the meta. Burn is not even 1. Why would you make that decision? Why not play something like, I don't know, Core Firewalker, which absolutely kind of demolishes both?" And I don't know why wouldn't you back then, but doesn't matter. Now people aren't playing timely reinforcements. Now people aren't really playing any life game. Even Auriok Champion and Core have disappeared because Sanctifier is just that much better. Because some shitty life gain doesn't really do anything against Ragavan decks, doesn't really do anything against Murktide decks. So people have just dropped the whole life gain thing for other cards, and we appreciate that. We really like that. So we can just steam through them uncontested. Yes, people do play life gain in some cards. However, I will say, because it's not something that's that popular to be playing, Kaya's Guile was a big card that disappeared because Prowess stopped seeing so much play, even though it's actually really good against Prowess. It's also good against Luris, so I don't know why it would disappear that much. Doesn't matter much. It's not here. We are safe. I had something to say about running a life gain. Oh, because people aren't running life gain, we get to skip on Skullcrack. And I love skipping on Skullcrack. I hate that spell. When I started playing Magic, when I started playing Modern, I was never a big Skullcrack fan. But then, things kept happening. We had Oko, we had Uro, before that we had Stoneforge Mystic. It was a big length of time that I was forced to play Skullcrack in the main. But trust me, Flame Rift is so much cooler. I love Flame Rift. I'm testing out 3 right now, and it's been wonderful. Okay, I think that's about it for this this special podcast episode, because I'm not sure when I will return to content creation. I do have a Patreon where I have a sideboard guide, and I'm writing some other article-like things to put there, but it's text-based, so I wouldn't really put it on the same field of making this podcast or streaming. I do plan to return to basically audio/video content creation. That's all I'll say for now. Hopefully this year, it will happen this year, so 2021. But I will disclose more on that later. If you want to be up to date with what I'm testing, with what I'm doing based on content creation, consider joining the Burn Discord. It's a great place for great discussions. And I think that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening to me yap about Innistrad for about 30 minutes. That was unplanned. And see you next time.